Trump and Epstein, though they'd broken contact, that Epstein was making threats to expose Trump. Trump was concerned about that. Epstein thought he might be given a pardon, protected by Trump, and that might explain the story of Epstein's death.
I'm Joanna Coles. This is the Daily Beast podcast, and today we are talking to the British historian Andrew Lownie, whose remarkable book entitled The Rise and the Fall of the House of Yorks really began the unravelling of Andrew, formerly known as Prince Andrew. Now, Andrew Lownie has, because he's been inundated with new information, started a Substack. I signed up to it and I urge you to. It's extremely compelling, but he has two outrageous allegations this weekend that we're going to completely unpack. And I have to say, when I read them, I couldn't quite believe them. I wasn't sure if they were true. They both involve, of course, Jeffrey Epstein. And we know that Jeffrey Epstein's friendship with Prince Andrew was part of the reason for Andrew's fall from grace. Anyway, you don't need me to tell you about them. We're going to talk to Andrew about them, and I don't think you're going to want to look away. So let's get into it. Andrew, I can't believe how much has happened since we last talked. And it was only, I think, 3 weeks ago. And you have in your new Substack two absolutely explosive allegations, which we are going to unpack. And when I say explosive, they really are. We will get to them in a minute. But what I wanted you to do first was give us an update with where we are. We had some embarrassing emails of Prince Andrew coming out from the Epstein trove of emails that came out last week. But where is Prince Andrew right now? Has he left Royal Lodge? And what are the developments since we last spoke, when he just lost his title of prince?
Well, I mean, from what I'm hearing, he doesn't seem too concerned. He feels he's a free man now. He's saying he's going to go on dating apps, and
he's going to go on dating apps, really?
And he's still in Royal Lodge. They still, I think, haven't opened all the parcels that Sir Ferguson ordered and hadn't opened herself. So I think they're not going to go up to Sandringham till after the new year, and clearly when all the royal family have left. And I'm not totally convinced he will go to Sandringham. I suspect that he may go somewhere else. We've got a private prosecution being brought by Republic. We have calls from former head of Royal Security and others saying that he should be investigated, both for sexual and financial irregularities. So he's clearly not out of the woods. I mean, there's been a lot of speculation about whether he might go to the Middle East, a lot of speculation about what Sarah Ferguson is going to do. Will she go to Switzerland, Portugal? Will she have a little coup-d'etat in London? It's been said that she's going to promote herself as a speaker for empowerment and positivity. I don't know how that's going to go.
Empowerment. How is she a speaker for empowerment? She was being funded by the world's most notorious pedophile.
Well, she is a woman, with her own logic, but she is a survivor. She's been pretty much, a broken spirit, particularly in 2010 when she was caught selling access to Andrew. And she came back. She went on Oprah, and people gave her the benefit of the doubt that she'd repented. And I think she's going to try this again. I don't think many people think that she's a busted flush. So it's a lot of it's up in the air. I mean, there are clearly tensions between the King and the Prince of Wales over how this is handled. The King's authority, I think, has been a bit diminished by the fact that he didn't act sooner and more ruthlessly. As you say, there are these lines coming out, Andrew, from the Epstein disclosures, showing him to be panicking, really, when the story of Jeffrey broke. And, of course, that kind of goes against the conventional line that he was pushing, that, he didn't know her and he didn't know what this was all about. But of course, it confirms what I found in my research and other people have written about.
For those of us who haven't gone through the emails in as much depth as you have, can you tell us exactly how he did react when it first became clear the allegations were that he'd slept with Virginia Giuffre?
Yeah, well, basically, keep me out of the story. And he went to PR people to undermine Giuffre. He tried to get information about her through his police protection officer, using his contacts with the FBI. It was all about damage limitations and about distancing himself from the story. He is only one of clearly many revelations that have come out with the disclosures in the Epstein files. We've got more, I think, imminent. I mean, interesting that Trump has now kind of changed his tune and is happy for the material to be released.
I would say I'm not sure if he's happy for the material to be released. He realizes that he wasn't going to win the battle to keep them suppressed. So he sort of lent into the rebels in the Republican Party, I would say. I think it's more of a political maneuver rather than he's happy for them to be released.
Absolutely right. Yeah. No, he sees that, that there's no advantage in trying to prevent their release as he has done up till now, and he's having to go with the mood. And I mean, thank goodness we're seeing this stuff. I think, again, we've seen the publication, of course, of Virginia Giuffre's own book, Ghosted by Amy Wallace, which has been well received and been a bestseller, and I think has again changed the dial for a lot of people. It really brings home how awful the situation was and how entitled these people felt they were. So, as you say, there have been a lot of developments, and I think there will be more. I mean, I think more people will come forward now. I'm certainly finding from my own research that people are coming forward, protection officers, former members of staff, ambassadors, who I think are appalled by what they've discovered and learnt, and I think also want to be on the right side of history here. And clearly that's what's motivated Trump to a certain extent as well. And
there have been lots of accusations. Tina Brown made it over the weekend that the Queen really enabled Andrew's behaviour. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I was vilified when I said this in August because the Queen, of course, was a saint and wouldn't have done anything like that. So it's great that, people like Tina Brown are saying these things. But it's exactly what I found. I mean, we know that attempts were made to suppress this story. ABC television were threatened, basically. If they went ahead, they would lose access to the royals. I know from talking to ambassadors and others that they were basically sent away with a flea in their ear when they tried to bring concerns to the Queen and her staff about Andrew. And of course, every time he seemed to be involved in some scandal, the Queen seemed to either take him with her to church or give him some new honour. So I think it was pretty apparent at the time, just no one was prepared to say it. And there was even a leak in the Sunday Times the other day, I think by the palace, but trying to basically put the blame on the Queen for not basically sorting this problem out and handing a time bomb to King Charles. So there's a lot of buck passing going on at the moment.
In your book entitled The Rise and Fall of the House of York, which we've talked about extensively on this podcast, you talk about a weekend in Thailand where Prince Andrew went through 40 prostitutes. I mean, subsequent reporting has also found that he appeared to have prostitutes coming into Buckingham Palace with no security clearance checks whatsoever.
No, absolutely. And I think Paul Page has gone public on that. He was one of the policemen on the North Gate. And I think this was of concern to the police because there were always people, they didn't know who they were. It was pretty clear that they were escorts. I mean, there were lots and lots of them coming in. We got lots of stories of escorts, for example, in Hong Kong. He took over the top floor of the Landmark Hotel and entertained escorts there on, I think, a trade mission. So everyone was turning a blind eye to his activities, which is extraordinary. And I think one of the things that hasn't really come out yet is the whole national security element of the story. We've had hints of alleged Chinese spies, but there are a lot of spies running around this story. It's easy to see that both Andrew and Sarah Ferguson were very easy ways into. They were very vulnerable because of their greed. They did have some very useful contacts.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. And of course, greed does make people vulnerable. And we've seen that with members of the family time and again. So let's move on to, Andrew, two remarkable allegations in your Substack, which I couldn't believe I was reading. The second one, which we'll come onto, is that Jeffrey Epstein was actually killed. But let's look at the first one, which sort of leads to the second one, which is that Jeffrey Epstein had had enough of Prince Andrew and Fergie. He was concerned that they would perhaps spill his secrets, and that he had hired a hitman to basically to remove them.
Yes, I mean, this comes from two sources, one in Paris and another one in Palm Beach, who were very close to Epstein. I mean, Epstein said all sorts of things. We can't always believe everything he said, but I think he was getting very nervous. He thought particularly Sarah Ferguson might spill the beans on him. And this was a precautionary measure, I suppose. Now, how far he went down the line, I'm trying to get more details of that in terms of the sniper, but the sniper was British Special Forces trained.
And had he actually had conversations with this particular sniper? I mean, it sounds so conspiracy theorist. I find it hard to believe, but then so much about this story is hard to believe.
Exactly. No, and I was very nervous about putting it up because clearly, it's an easy way of undermining my credibility. So we'll see what comes. I mean, we do know that Sarah was very concerned. I mean, that was a reason that she kind of kept in with Epstein because she was scared of him. And I think this could have been just a threat. It could have been just as paranoia. As I said, I haven't been able to follow up the story to find any more detail, though I've been told I will be given the name of the sniper. But it is an extraordinary story, but it's... as you say, the story is bizarre anyway, and we're dealing with people who are not necessarily in the realms of reality.
If you were a sniper actively in the special services in the UK, the idea of being commissioned by an American to kill members of the British royal family, I mean, how on earth would he get away with it? I mean, it just seems remarkable.
Well, I don't think this was a serving member of the Special Forces, as someone who'd been trained as a British Special Forces person. I'm just thinking of the update of the Freddie Forsyth novel.
The Day of the Jackal.
And isn't that, I think, then the update, it is about an ex-British Special Forces person who is basically a gun for hire. So in some ways, that isn't that odd. It's interesting that I've got, that's come from two different sources, but, often that happens. It doesn't mean it's true. But, it'll be interesting to see if it does bring forward anything else in terms of disclosures. A lot of these things are rumors, and you just kind of float them and just see what happens, and maybe they have to be disregarded.
Well, and in the hierarchy of people that Epstein was frightened of, I wouldn't have thought Sarah Ferguson would be very high on his list.
No, I agree. But I mean, maybe she's more garrulous than the others. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what she knew that he was concerned about. But, we have had, these rumors, for example, moving on to the second part of this, the revelation that, Trump and Epstein, though they'd broken contact, that Epstein was making threats to expose Trump. That was one of the stories. Trump was concerned about that. Epstein thought he might be given a pardon protected by Trump. And those rumors have circulated for a while. And that might explain the story of Epstein's death, which I think, a lot of people have questioned, and I question in the book. I mean, just in terms of Epstein being one of the great survivors. He was at the beginning of his court problems. He had always got out of them in the past by paying people off and having good lawyers. And he was not someone talking to for example, the lawyers who were dealing with him, as someone who was suicidal. And then we have all the strange things going on in the prison with the cameras not working and the guards falling asleep. We have Michael Baden's autopsy suggesting it was homicide rather than suicide. We've got former members of the correctional facility saying it was impossible to kill yourself just because of the heights and the sheets and various other things. And then, as I say, the source, which has come from a good FBI source, talking about a fellow convict who was brought in to do this.
Can you explain to me how this all unfolded? So you were contacted by a former FBI agent. How did this play out? If you're the historian, hugely respected historian, you have a PhD in history, how did you get this information? How did it come to you?
It didn't come to me. I went to them. I knew about a case that they worked on. I know they'd left the FBI. I approached them, and they kindly, in confidence, shared some correspondence with me that revealed this.
And the correspondence was between whom?
Internal FBI correspondence.
Internal FBI correspondence has Jeffrey Epstein being killed in his cell.
That's what I was told. And this is what actually Ghislaine Maxwell also said, I think, when she was interviewed by Daphne Barrick a few months ago. And it, of course, makes sense, someone who has very little to lose and a lot to gain.
Set the scene. What did the correspondence say, Andrew, and how was he killed?
I don't know. I don't think it says that in the correspondence from what I remember looking at.
Well, were these internal emails that you saw?
Yes. This was the investigation into this character, and there seemed to be a correspondence talking about this particular figure and what had happened, what he had done. But it's only a fragment, shall we say? So again, it would be useful. I know the FBI had been looking at this. I mean, it's kind of been passed off. It was a suicide, and that's been the line. But I do know that people were looking at it, and I think a lot of people suspected that. And that would all fit into the sort of his paranoia when he went into prison and the worries about Sarah Ferguson and others.
So I just want to get this completely straight, because I know you talked at the Chiswick Book Fair this weekend, and you talked about being told by FBI agents that Epstein was killed in his prison cell by another prison inmate. And you're now saying you saw FBI correspondence that discussed this. Were they discussing it as a possibility? Were they floating it as a theory? Or were they saying they were confident this is what had happened?
From what I remember, it's a little while since I looked at it. I was shown it, but it was treated as fact. This wasn't speculation.
And they know, and you know, who the inmate was?
Yes, there was a name there, yeah.
And why haven't you shared the name?
Well, I mean, I haven't got, this is the only bit of evidence I've got. I mean, clearly there are libel considerations, given that what's happened to various people in this story, perhaps wiser I didn't share it too publicly. But, at some point I hope I can. It's still sort of ongoing research.
So a lot of people are going to say Andrew Lownie's just launched a Substack. He's trying to sell more copies of his book. He's now floating conspiracies that have been around. What do you say to people who are just saying this is wild exaggerations from a man who can't possibly know?
Well, I'd like to be able to follow up on this as soon as I can. This story has slightly run earlier than I expected, and the decision was taken by the people doing my Substack that we would release it when I was waiting to do more research.
But didn't you say it when you were actually at the Chiswick Book Fair? So you sort of put it out into the world.
I did, and no one picked it up, so I thought it was okay.
No one picked it up. What are the British press doing? Oh my goodness.
It's only smart people like you. So it had all gone rather quiet. And then people doing my Substack thought we should put it out there. But I'm a bit more cautious.
Yes, you should put it out there.
Yeah. So, but you're absolutely right. I can understand, that people want more evidence. I mean, the problem with this story is it's often difficult to get the affidavits and things that people want. It is, of course, I'm starting a Substack and I've got a book to sell. So there's a perfectly fair comments to make. But, lots of people have Substacks and books to sell. Doesn't mean what they say isn't true.
Right. And also, I think what's so interesting about your book entitled The Rise and the Fall of the House of York is that so much of what you said in the book, that the Yorks were trying to stop coming out. I mean, we know that they tried to stop their friends from speaking to you. They wouldn't speak to you. So much of what has come out in the book has proven not only to be true, certainly more than the tip of the iceberg, but it's led to, along with Virginia Giuffre's book, Nobody's Fool, the prince losing his title.
Yeah. I mean, that's extraordinary. I mean, I think they realised that this... There were wider questions about royal privilege and accountability being asked by the media, by social media, and they felt that they had to kind of cut him loose before he infected the rest of them. And I think when the king saw him, was being heckled at Lichfield, when I think they were worried that there might be more Epstein material, they may know what's there, I don't know. I think they realised that they had to distance themselves, and there had been increasing calls that he should be investigated and could be charged. And in those circumstances, clearly they needed to distance themselves. And, in some ways, they should have been dealing with this problem years ago. They shouldn't have allowed it to drag on as long as it has.
Well, I was going to ask you about, because in a sense, this story has become so prominent because of Jeffrey Epstein. And yet the prince was off frequently, as you have pointed out, on taxpayers' money, on diplomatic jaunts, supposedly trade jaunts, where in fact he didn't want to stay at the residences of the ambassador because it clearly becomes evident that he wanted hot and cold running prostitutes where he was staying. And I'm surprised that, given how many people knew this was going on in the palace, that nobody reined him in. Was it because the Queen and Prince Philip gave him cover, and that you can't, once you know that they support him, even if you're a respected member of the household, the royal household staff, your word is not going to be taken seriously?
Yes, I mean, the problem was, the policemen were reporting not to the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, but to the head of the household, in effect. And even Tony Johnson-Burt, who's the head of the household, when people brought him complaints, said, look, we just got to do our master's bidding. He wasn't a great fan of Andrew. In fact, he got into fisticuffs themselves at one point.
They got into fisticuffs?
Supposedly, it's supposed to have turned physical when Andrew couldn't get hold of a room that he wanted. So Johnson-Burt did sort of stand up to him, but Andrew just always went to Mummy, and Mummy would overrule anyone. Ambassadors did complain and then found that their sort of careers were pretty curtailed. Simon Wilson, who was the deputy ambassador in Bahrain, spoke out and then found his security clearance, I think, was withdrawn for a job he had later on. So they have ways of making life difficult for people who don't play ball, and I think the view was taken, just give him what he wants. I mean, talking to members of the royal household last week, I was amazed that both he and Sarah Ferguson still seem to have staffs. Sarah was coming in and getting her laundry done at Windsor or at Buckingham Palace, and they were still entertaining businessmen in royal palaces, and was still operating under the radar. So I think what we're told and what's happening are two very different things. But you're absolutely right. I mean, the Epstein thing is kind of taken everyone's attention away from what is the real scandal, I think, which is where they've abused their position as royals to make money for themselves. I mean, some ambassadors refused to play ball, and when they were given a list of people that Andrew wanted him, and either he or his mates to meet, didn't provide it or said they were unsuitable and kind of warned him off. But there was quite a lot, I talk about in the book, and I'm not casting any aspersions, but Andrew had close connections with banks, banks that dealt with the sort of customers that no one else wanted to deal with. And so, you can see how the system might have worked.
So Peter Morgan, the writer of the brilliant Netflix series The Crown, I read, said that when he was envisaging writing about the royal family, he thought about the Queen as almost as Tony Soprano, that this was a business and she was the sort of head of it. I'm not saying he was likening it to the mob, but as he was thinking about it unfolding over seasons, how did you sustain the story? Now you look back on the Queen and Prince Philip, given all we know now, and the love and respect and awe with which the Queen was held, do you think that if she was still alive, she would still have that? Or do you think she's been subsequently revealed as enabling a very corrupt son, fully knowing what he was up to?
Yeah, no, it's interesting whether, my book might have been published and whether the press would have been as confident as some of them were in running some of the stories they did. Because, I know there are a lot of stories that suppressed. So, I suspect now the Queen's dead and Philip's dead, it was a little easier for me to get published. I had a very supportive publisher and big publisher, and that helped. And I think then, people felt the ground had been softened and they could come back. And there was clearly a very strong feeling among the population that, elites were getting away with some pretty bad behavior and needed to be held to account. And, that clearly was a big factor in the States, but I think it was also a stronger feeling in Britain too. So, I think so the whole softening up process was beginning. and it made it possible. But yeah, I think if the Queen was still alive, I think it would be very difficult.
I wanted to ask you about the Queen's husband, Prince Philip, otherwise known as the Duke of Edinburgh. What was his role in all this? Was he a supporter of Andrew? Did he try and rein him in? Did the Queen always take preference over the Duke of Edinburgh? I mean, as a married couple, as parents, how were they trying to influence Andrew?
Well, I mean, my understanding had always been that the Duke of Edinburgh was the chap who ran the family, and he ran a pretty tight ship. I mean, he was the one who basically summoned Andrew to Wood Farm and told him basically, you've got to resign all your things, this is it. And he was pretty tough. So and the Queen did sort of listen to him. So I find it's extraordinary that wasn't what happened. And all I've been told is that he did obey the Queen. The Queen said no. We're going to sort of tough this one out, and he had to go with her. I mean, to be fair, he was also by this stage in his 70s, and I think he was just didn't really want to have all the fights, as she was, that might be required. They thought they could probably get away with it, or they perhaps thought they could deal with it. They thought maybe the problems at the time weren't worth addressing because of the bad publicity, and they do it quietly behind the scenes, and it never happened. They may not have been told the full story by Andrew. I mean, one of the interesting things I picked up last week was that Andrew hadn't told the staff. He didn't know about the interview with Newsnight in Buckingham Palace, and therefore the room hadn't been prepared. It hadn't actually been cleaned. And they were the staff were very upset that actually it wasn't they didn't think in a fit state to have TV cameras in it.
The Queen and Prince Philip must have been older than in their 70s, weren't they? Were they in their 70s? Because I thought the first story about Andrew and Epstein came out, I think, in the Mail or Mail on Sunday in 2011. So they would have...
Yes, it did.
So wouldn't they have been in their 80s at that stage?
80s, sorry. Yes, so they're older. Yes, exactly. So, I mean, so in some ways, they had this attitude of sticking their head in the sand sometimes, and I think that's what they did. And maybe they thought someone else would deal with it, who didn't deal with it. Who knows? I mean, they're not here to tell us. I mean, to be fair, it was also a problem for King Charles. I mean, he was taking a much more active role by that stage, and in the way that William is taking a more active role now. So it was kind of on his watch as well, and he's not a great, there's no love lost between the brothers. And he has a full measure of his younger brother. He was the one who didn't want him to have this job as a special envoy because he knew how he would abuse the position. So it is a mystery how this was allowed to happen. And maybe we'll know. Maybe some of the courtiers will eventually talk.
I was very interested that you said that since the publication of the book and since Prince Andrew has lost his title, that now members of the household, of the royal household, feel much freer to talk to you, even off the record, because they're much less frightened of him.
Yes, absolutely. It seems to be, I'm amazed. I mean, I had dinner last week with the former equerry. And these are sort of people who would have given me a very wide berth before the book was published. So, and again, you've got to wonder, why are these people coming forward? Is it that they want to share information, feel uncomfortable about what they know, and feel that there's a higher loyalty than there is to the NDA or their previous job? Or are they giving you disinformation in order to undermine your credibility? Or is there some factor that, a lot of them didn't like Andrew and were very, very happy to see him, a fallen figure. So you're constantly assessing why people are talking to you. But certainly I've gone back to a lot of people, and they've talked. A lot of people now prefer to go on the record as well.
Very interesting. So, and I know you're doing a follow-up to your book entitled, calling it Untitled. Is that going to be packed with new revelations?
Yeah, well, I've got 150 pages of notes so far, just from the material from people who've come forward.
Wow.
And so this is this book is a couple of years away. So, yeah, I think it will all be completely new. And we will cover some of the same period, clearly, but I'm just getting lot more new information, for example, about his time as a trade envoy, and activities in places like Kazakhstan, places I didn't know about, like Mongolia, We took out, I think, almost all the material about his activities in Libya, for example. And those have now been, I think we could now put that stuff back in.
Good Lord.
You know, the stuff from Peter Mandelson and Epstein was taken out because the lawyers didn't believe it. And now, of course, we've got the revelations about Mandelson and Epstein's activities together and how close they were. So, you know, it's been gratifying to see that a lot of my sources proved to be absolutely right, which is why I sort of felt it was okay to go out on the Substack, because the sources have proved to be reliable in the past, and I'm hopeful that they're continuing to be so.
Well, now that the Epstein files are about to be released, I'm assuming that there will be more emails, more texts, more communications with the former Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson. Are you expecting more?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and other names, you know, because clearly the focus has been on him. And, you know, clearly we've had Mandelson, but very little on the American side. So, you know, given the number of documents there are, I mean, there've got to be a huge number of revelations. And, you know, we remember there were 40 girls came forward to give evidence in the original Palm Beach investigation. So there's, you know, I still think we've only got the tip of the iceberg here in terms of what even law enforcement knows, let alone what may emerge quite separately from other witnesses and testimony.
Do you think there is the chance that Prince Andrew, as he was known, will end up coming to the United States to give evidence?
No, I think that's very unlikely. I mean, I think that was a little bit of grandstanding by the Democrats. I mean, he's been caught between a rock and a hard place for a long time, because clearly if he didn't give evidence or didn't cooperate with authorities before, everyone assumed he was guilty. But if he did, clearly he was going to probably implicate himself. So he's in exactly the same position now. That I'm sure the lawyers will just say this is a sort of a political trick. Democrats clearly are in a minority on the committee. He's not an American citizen. So I can't see him cooperating until he's forced to do so. But I can see material being passed to the British authorities for him to be investigated. Both in terms of say, the sexual trafficking and the misconduct in public office, which is, I think, the most obvious charge that we levelled against him. And I think that, you know, there are good grounds there. And I've offered to offer material that wasn't put in the book, but for legal reasons, to give that to the National Crime Agency. I think I have a story on my Substack of about $5 million in a suitcase in Kazakhstan, for example.
This was a suitcase of cash.
This is a suitcase of cash that he was given. And we know, you know, for example, that he was offered a £3.85 million, 1% of a huge deal to bring a Greek water company into Kazakhstan. And that emerged, I think, through email leaks. So
I think the deal never took place, though, right?
It didn't take place because of internal unrest. So, but we do know that there were these sort of deals going on. And so I think we may find other things emerge. Other people may come forward and talk. You know, Elon Musk has said various things in the past. There are people who've seen the files before they were redacted who may, again, be prepared to talk or leak material.
Are these just the things that were in Jeffrey Epstein's safe, or what do we actually think they were? Are these the supposed documents and information that he was, in theory, or alleged to have been blackmailing people with?
Well, I mean, there's material from the Department of Justice and the FBI. This is all part of the investigation. So there'll be witness testimony with people they interviewed. There will be material that they've collected. So, for example, we know that there were videos and tapes that he made of people who came to the house or the various homes, and those may be released. I think one of them has been briefly shown on the internet. So there's a lot of material. There's, as we say, the stuff that he just kept himself that was confiscated when they raided the homes. We don't really know. I mean, this is what's so interesting. But there certainly is a lot of material, and you know, just to see how devastating the limited amount that's being leaked so far has been, it suggests that there's some really big damaging disclosures to come.
Well, you couldn't have launched a Substack at a better time, Andrew. I can't wait for the next instalment, and I hope you get more information on what actually happened to Jeffrey Epstein in jail. But good luck with, solving what sometimes feels like the world's biggest mystery.
Yes, well, I mean, think how much has come out just in the last few months, and so I'm hopeful that the full story, a pretty full story, will eventually emerge, but it just may take time.
Yeah, and as they say, you really couldn't make it up. Every day there's something coming at you, and you just think, how is this even possible? Anyway, I'm glad to know that you haven't entirely jumped the shark, and we will come back to you the moment the Epstein files are released, because we would love your take on what you've found in there. So promise us you'll come back.
Of course, I'd look forward to it.
All right, Andrew Lownie, thank you so much.
A pleasure.
I sometimes feel that I'm on psychedelics listening to these stories. They're so outlandish, the claims, and yet time after time, it turns out the conspiracies are true, that Randy Andy, as he was nicknamed by the tabloids at the beginning of, I want to say the 1980s, turned out to be so much truer than anyone could have imagined. And now Andrew Lownie's allegations about Jeffrey Epstein being killed in his prison cell, about Jeffrey Epstein hiring a sniper to actually take out 2 members of the British royal family. It seems so outlandish, and yet this is where we are. Well, we'll have Andrew back with the release of the Epstein files to dig into them more. But in the meantime, please subscribe to the Daily Beast. We are independent media. We love and are very grateful for your support. Don't forget to leave us your comments. The comments have blown up, and I'm trying my best to read most of them. I can't get through all of them, but we certainly try. And as our First Lady would have us say, do not forget this week, in particular, Be Beast. And special thanks to our Be Beast tier of membership: Herbie, Andrew Meller, Fulvia Orlando, Laz Conde, Sandra Clark, Bonzo, Val, Love Francisco, Bocock, DC, Karen White, Heidi Riley, Connie Rutherford, Sharon Shipley, and Andrea Hodel. And thank you to our production team, Devon Rogerino, Anna von Urson, and our editor, Jessie Millward.